Have you ever sat alone in a quiet room and realized no one is going to ask you what you had for dinner? That no one is going to check if you got home safe or if you remembered to take your medicine today? The laughter that once filled the house is gone, replaced by the sound of the ticking clock and maybe the distant hum of a refrigerator. The couch still remembers the shape of the people who used to sit there, but the voices, the warmth, they have faded. If that sounds familiar to you, you are not alone. It is a feeling that sneaks up on many of us not overnight, but little by little. At first, it feels like peace, no one calling you, no one needing anything. You think, maybe this is just a new season, a slower one. But then one day, you catch yourself staring at nothing, wondering how the days got so quiet, and why your chest feels a little heavier than it used to. This is where we meet Helen. Helen is 81. She lives in a small, tidy home in the heart of Oregon. Her husband passed away 6 years ago. Her only son lives 2 states away, working long hours and raising kids of his own. He calls when he can. But you know how life gets. Her neighbors, the ones who used to bring her casseroles after church, have moved or passed on. The street feels unfamiliar now. Even the sound of kids playing outside has grown rare. At first, Helen thought she was just adjusting. I guess I like the quiet now, she told herself. No one to clean up after, no schedule to follow. But that peace turned into stillness. That stillness turned into something colder. It was not just loneliness. It was a sense of becoming invisible, as if the world had moved on and left her behind. She would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the wind move the branches, and wonder if anyone even knew she was still here. And that is the moment many of us do not talk about enough. That space between being okay and being quietly lost. That strange place where your body is still strong enough to get up and walk, but your spirit, not so much. This story is not just about Helen. It is about what happens when we reach that chapter of life where the outside world grows distant and the inside world becomes louder, when the phone does not ring as much, when your meals are simpler, and your days all start to blend. When you begin to ask questions you never used to ask, like, is this it? Is this really how the rest of life is supposed to feel? But here is the truth. It does not have to stay that way. What Helen did not know yet is that her story was not over. She still had choices, still had power, and still had value more than she realized. She just needed to see it again. In this video, we are going to walk with Helen through the quiet, through the memories, through the small moments that changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, you will see a little of your own story in hers, because here is something we often forget. Being alone is not the same as being forgotten. It is not the same as being finished. Sometimes, it is the very moment we are called to rediscover ourselves and to reconnect, not just with others, but with the parts of us that still hold life, purpose, and strength. So if you have ever looked around your home and felt the silence pressing in, this story is for you. If you have ever wondered if you still matter, this message is for you. And if you have ever felt like the world stopped knocking on your door, let this be your reminder. You still have a key. You can open the door again. You can step outside again. And you can choose today to live fully, not just quietly. And now, before we move on, I want to hear from you. If you are still with me right now, if this message speaks to something in your heart, let me know in the comments. Type the number 1 below if you are here with us and still believing in the life you have. or type 0 if today feels like a hard one, because either way, you are not alone, not here, not anymore. Let us take the first step together. Helen did, and so can you. Number 1. The quiet crisis. No schedule. No purpose. Helen used to wake up every morning at 6:30, not because she had to, but because it was part of her rhythm. For years, her mornings started with the sound of her husband brewing coffee and the radio playing softly in the background. There was always something to do: laundry, groceries, a friend to visit, or a church meeting to prepare for. Life had structure, and with that structure came purpose. But now, Helen often woke up whenever her eyes happened to open. Some mornings, it was 7:15. Other days, it was closer to 10. And nobody noticed. Nobody asked. There were no phone calls reminding her of a lunch date. No grandchildren running down the hallway. No one to say, "Good morning. What's the plan for today?" At first, she thought it was freedom. She no longer had to rush. She could eat when she wanted, nap when she wanted, sit by the window for hours if she pleased. And that felt like a small gift, like she had finally earned the right to rest. But slowly, that freedom began to feel different. Days started blending together. She would forget what day it was. Monday looked like Thursday. Saturday felt like any other quiet Tuesday. There was no difference between mornings and afternoons, except for the position of the sun on her living room floor. Meals became simpler, smaller, sometimes skipped altogether. Why cook for one? Why bother with dishes for just herself? And the more Helen drifted through her days without a plan, the heavier she began to feel, not just physically, but emotionally. It was not depression. Not at first. It was more like a fog, a thick stillness that settled over everything, a sense of going through the motions, but not quite knowing why. What Helen did not realize was that her body was reacting to the lack of routine. Science has shown that as we age, having a daily structure is more than just helpful. It is vital. When there is no regular rhythm, the brain loses its cues, hormones get disrupted, sleep patterns shift, and the body begins to move less, rest more, and slowly lose energy. This is not just about willpower, it is biological. According to studies shared in the guide, 60, 70, 80 years old. Walking less. One of the biggest hidden causes of fatigue in seniors is simply a lack of structure. When there is no schedule, the motivation to move declines. When movement decreases, muscles weaken, circulation slows, and energy drains even if nothing else is physically wrong. This is the quiet crisis no one warns us about. Helen began sitting more and moving less. She would go hours without getting up, sometimes staying in her recliner all morning watching old shows she could not remember the name of. She stopped doing the morning stretches her doctor had recommended. She told herself she would take a walk later, but later kept slipping into tomorrow, and the longer she stayed still, the harder it became to start again. Freedom without direction became a trap. She thought she was resting, but in truth, she was slowly disengaging from her surroundings, from her body, and from herself. It was not until one afternoon, sitting in the same chair she had occupied since breakfast, that Helen noticed something. She had not spoken a single word out loud all day. She had not opened a window. She had not even brushed her hair. That was the moment something clicked. This was not rest. This was retreat. This was not peace. It was pause. And the pause was stretching too long. The danger of losing your schedule after a lifetime of structure is not just that you stop doing things. It is that you stop being someone who wants to do things. The days no longer carry meaning, and that begins to reflect in your spirit. But here is the important part. Helen's story does not end there, because recognizing the trap is the first step out of it. No one told her that structure could be soft, that it did not have to be strict or demanding, just a simple rhythm, something to look forward to in each part of the day, something as small as making the bed, sitting outside for 10 minutes after breakfast, calling someone every Tuesday, or stretching before bed. These are not chores. These are anchors. Without them, even the strongest heart starts to drift. And Helen, like many others, began to see that the answer was not doing more. It was doing something, anything, on purpose. Because when your days have no shape, your energy has nowhere to land. And when your energy has nowhere to land, your spirit starts to shrink. Freedom without focus can become the heaviest weight of all. But it is never too late to draw the map again, even if it is just one small step at a time. Number 2, the home that became heavy. There was a time when Helen's living room was filled with voices, the clinking of teacups, the shuffle of shoes at the door, the warmth of shared stories. That room used to be the heart of her home. Guests would walk in and compliment her floral couch or admire the family photos on the shelf. It was a place where life happened. Now, the curtains are drawn most days. The couch still stands in its place, but the cushions have sagged. The coffee table is buried beneath stacks of old mail, church bulletins, and newspapers from years past. Boxes of yarn sit unopened beside the fireplace, some of them filled with half-finished scarves that were meant to be gifts but never made it into anyone's hands. The air smells slightly musty now, like fabric that has not been aired out in too long. The sunlight filters in only faintly through the dusty blinds and the photos on the shelves. Their colors have faded. Faces once vibrant now look like shadows of memory, trapped in dull glass frames. Helen would walk past that room every day and barely notice. She had grown used to its quiet clutter. It did not bother her, at least not at first. But the truth was, she had stopped going in there at all. The room that once held laughter now held silence and too many things she was not ready to face. There was the Afghan her husband had loved, still draped over the back of the recliner he used to sit in. There were holiday cards from family, some still in their envelopes, and there were bags of clothes she had meant to donate 2 winters ago, but never touched. At first, Helen told herself these items were just part of life. I will get to them later, she would say, but later never came. What had started as a little clutter became a quiet weight, something that sat heavy in the room and heavier in her chest. What she did not realize was that this was not just about mess. It was about memory. Every item she kept held a story, a piece of the past she did not want to let go. Letting go felt like losing someone all over again. That is how the clutter began, with love, with loss, with longing. But slowly, the things she was holding on to began to hold her back. This is a truth many older adults face, often without saying it out loud, as shared in the guide. 11 Ugly Things Seniors Do as They Age. Clutter is not always about laziness or lack of care. It is often a symptom of emotional weight, grief, loneliness, or fear of forgetting. The problem is, when the home begins to reflect the past more than the present, it also starts to pull us away from life. Helen's home was no longer a place that lifted her. It had become a museum of what used to be, and over time, she noticed something. She stopped inviting people over, not because they would judge her, but because she no longer felt proud of her space. The home that once made her feel alive now made her feel ashamed. The living room was not for living anymore. It was just a space she avoided. She found herself spending most of her time in the kitchen or bedroom, the only areas that felt somewhat manageable. The rest of the house, especially the living room, felt frozen, stuck in time. It was not dirty. It was not neglected, but it was heavy, heavy with things, heavy with emotion, and that heaviness started to shape her daily life. She sat less in the sunroom. She played the piano less. She even stopped hanging up the new photos her son sent of the grandkids. There just did not seem to be space anymore. Not on the walls, and not in her heart. The sad part is, this happens slowly. One item here, one memory there, until the home becomes a reflection not of life, but of things unspoken. And when you live surrounded by what you cannot face, you start to feel stuck physically, emotionally, spiritually. Helen was not a hoarder. She was a woman who had lived a full life, filled with love and loss. But the line between keeping memories and being trapped by them is thin, and at some point, her home stopped serving her. It began to burden her. What Helen needed was not to throw everything away. It was to reclaim her space one shelf, one drawer, one decision at a time. She needed to turn her living room back into a place for laughter, not just remembrance. Because the truth is, a home should breathe with the present, not just echo the past. And when your surroundings reflect who you are today, not just who you were, you begin to feel lighter, more alive, more connected. Helen had not realized how much her space was shaping her spirit. But as we will see, all it takes is one small change to begin clearing not just the room, but the heaviness inside. Because a house full of memories can still have room for new ones if you make space for them. Number 3, disconnected and self-isolated. Helen had always believed in doing things the old-fashioned way. She wrote letters by hand, made phone calls on her landline, and used her calendar the same way she had for decades, with a pen and a quiet moment each Sunday night. When her son suggested she try using a smartphone, she waved it off. "I do not need all that," she said. "If someone wants to talk to me, they can call." But slowly, the phone stopped ringing. It was not out of neglect or malice. Life simply shifted. Her son and his wife started using a group chat to share updates with the whole family, photos, funny moments, reminders for birthdays or Sunday dinners. All of it went through that one digital thread. It was fast, easy, and allowed them to stay connected throughout the day. To everyone but Helen, she began to notice it at family gatherings. Someone would say, "Did you see the picture of Ava's school play?" Helen would blink, confused. "What picture?" There would be an awkward pause, and someone would say, "Oh, we posted it in the chat." The chat. That word started to sting. She began to feel like the only person standing outside a window, watching her own family laugh and share, unable to hear what they were saying. She was not forgotten, but she was not included. Either, not really. She had cut herself off without realizing it, simply by refusing to learn something new. The truth is, Helen's story is not unique. A 2022 study published by the Pew Research Center found that over 40% of seniors above 75 still avoid smartphones or internet-based tools, and as a result, report higher rates of social isolation, not because they lack family, but because they struggle to connect through the tools modern life now relies on. The barrier is not capability, it is mindset. And Helen had fallen into the same quiet trap many older adults face, mistaking resistance for control, when in reality, it leads to loss. She told herself she did not need technology, but what she actually lost was access to conversations, to daily joys, to the little things that knit a family together, not in big dramatic moments, but in the everyday. Eventually, even Helen could not ignore how left out she felt. One afternoon, her granddaughter Molly came over and sat beside her with an old iPhone. "Grandma," she said gently, "you do not have to learn everything. Just one thing. Let me show you how to send a message. One sentence. That is all." At first, Helen protested. She felt embarrassed. She had always been the one teaching, not learning. But Molly smiled, patient and kind, and walked her through it. Tap here, type here, hit send. The message was simple. "Hi everyone, this is Grandma. I am learning." And just like that, the chat exploded with replies, dozens of hearts, a picture of Ava waving, her son's message, "Mom, so glad to see you here." Helen felt something she had not felt in months, a sense of being part of something again. It was just a text, but to her, it was a lifeline, because learning that one small thing did more than connect her to a screen. It reconnected her to her people. It gave her a way back into the flow of daily life. She saw her great-grandson's first steps. The same day they happened, she got birthday reminders, silly jokes, and warm good nights. She had not realized how lonely she was until that door reopened. Sometimes, the technology we fear is not the problem. It is the wall we build around ourselves out of pride, fear, or stubbornness that truly isolates us. The world is not leaving us behind on purpose. It just moves forward, but we can catch up, one message at a time. So if you are listening to this and feeling left out, ask yourself, honestly, have you said, "I do not need that one too many times"? Is it possible that you are missing more than you know? Here is your challenge. Try one thing. Ask someone you trust to show you how to do just one task. Send a message, make a video call, or open a photo. You do not have to master it. You only need to begin. And if this message speaks to you, if you have ever felt that sting of being out of the loop, I invite you to share your experience in the comments below. Just type 1 if you are open to learning something new, or type 0 if it still feels too overwhelming. No judgment, just community, just a start. Because even one small step toward connection can change everything. Just ask Helen. Number 4. Change begins with small acts. For Helen, it did not start with a grand plan. There were no big resolutions or dramatic makeovers, just a quiet morning, a steaming cup of tea, and the soft creak of the porch chair beneath her as she sat and looked out at the world. That morning, she had woken up at 7 a.m., not because she had to, but because she chose to. It was her first decision in reclaiming her life. That morning ritual, sipping tea under the open sky, became her anchor. It reminded her that the day was beginning, and she was part of it. No longer drifting between hours, Helen began to give her days a shape. It did not have to be complicated. It just needed intention. Her next step came from a suggestion at church. One of the ladies mentioned the phone tree, a simple rotation where members would call one another each morning. Just to check in, Helen decided to join, Every day after her tea, she would pick up the phone and call a woman named Margaret. They would chat for 5 or 10 minutes about the weather, about the morning birds, sometimes about nothing at all, but it mattered. Suddenly, Helen had a reason to get dressed before noon, a reason to speak out loud, a reason to listen. These small acts, though they seemed insignificant, began to shift her energy. She noticed her voice felt steadier, her mind more alert, and most importantly, she began to feel useful again, connected to someone else in a world that often felt so quiet. Every afternoon, Helen began walking, just 10 minutes around her block. At first, she felt unsure. Her legs ached. Her balance felt shaky. She was slow, but she went anyway, because what she learned, and what many studies now show, is that energy does not come from rest alone. It comes from movement. The more we move, the more the body responds with strength, with balance, with better circulation, and clearer thinking. The research cited in 60, 70, 80 years old walking less explains that most of the energy loss we associate with aging actually comes from inactivity, not from age itself. Helen was proving that. At first, she could only manage half the block before turning back, then the whole block. Then she started recognizing neighbors again, waving to a dog walker or smiling at a little girl on a scooter. The world that had felt so distant was suddenly around her again. And then came the structure. Helen started using a calendar. Nothing fancy, just a simple page where she could mark small commitments to herself. On Tuesdays, she would water her plants, trim the herbs in the kitchen window, and wipe down the leaves of her African violets. On Fridays, she would call her son, not just when she remembered, not when she had time, but because it was Friday. And that was the day she had chosen to connect. These decisions brought rhythm. They gave her something to look forward to. And more than that, they made her feel responsible, not in a burdensome way, but in a deeply human way. Her time began to matter again. Her energy grew, not because she had slept more or eaten differently, but because her body and mind were finally back in motion. She was no longer just filling time. She was living it breath by breath, step by step. Helen's transformation was quiet. There were no balloons or announcements, but it was real. Her days no longer blurred together. She had a reason to get out of bed, a reason to smile at the start of each morning, because here is the truth. The smallest changes can have the biggest impact. Waking up at the same time, moving your body just a little each day, making space in your week for connection and care. These are not chores. They are lifelines. Helen did not set out to change her life. She simply wanted to feel more alive. And in doing so, she discovered a kind of power that many overlook: the power of consistency, the power of ritual, the power of saying, "This is my day, and I will choose how to live it." Her story reminds us that we are never too old to begin again, never too far gone to find rhythm in our days, and never, ever too late to move, connect, and reclaim a sense of purpose, one small act at a time. Number 5, restoring the mind and rediscovering self-worth. Helen had reclaimed some rhythm in her days. Her mornings were no longer adrift. Her body was moving again, and her connections were beginning to bloom. But something deeper still needed tending, something quiet, something inside. It was not just about routine or walking or talking to others. Helen needed to reconnect with herself. For a long time, she had stopped hearing her own voice, not the one that says hello on the phone, but the one that reflects, the one that remembers, the one that wonders. What do I still have to offer one morning? While drinking tea on the porch, she picked up a small notebook she had bought years ago but never used. She opened it and wrote a single line at the top of the page. Today, I am grateful for. She paused. Then, quietly, she wrote the sun through the trees. It was simple, but in that moment, she felt something shift. That one sentence, just one, made her pay attention. It made her stop and notice something good, something present, something that belonged to her. She did it again the next day, and the next. Today, I am grateful for Molly's laugh. Today, I am grateful for my strong legs. The act was small, but the impact was powerful. By naming what was good, Helen started to see more of it. It rewired her focus, turning her attention from what was missing to what remained. Gratitude. As research from the University of California, Davis has shown, improves emotional resilience, lowers stress, and even enhances sleep, especially in older adults. But Helen did not stop with journaling. One afternoon, she found an old voice recorder her husband used to use, the kind that clicked when you pressed record. She smiled. The memory was warm, and then she had an idea. She began telling stories into the microphone, not for the world, not for a podcast, just for her granddaughter. She told the story of the time she and her sister got stuck in the rain at the county fair, the day she got her first car, the time her husband surprised her with roses on a Tuesday just because. Her voice trembled at times. Other times, it cracked with laughter. And when she played the recordings back, it was like rediscovering a part of herself that had been quietly waiting to speak again. She sent the files to Molly. Her granddaughter texted back instantly. "Grandma, I love your voice. I never knew this story. Tell me more." And so, Helen did. With each recording, she felt her spirit reawaken, not just because someone was listening, but because she was listening to herself, to her own history, her humor, her strength, and then came the knitting. Her hands had once been so familiar with yarn and needles. It had been years since she picked them up, but one cool morning, she opened a box from the hall closet, found a ball of soft blue wool, and began again, slowly at first, then with ease. This time, the scarf was not for a relative. It was for someone she had never met, a resident at the local care center. Helen had read about a program where seniors made handmade items for those living in assisted living homes. She sent a note with the first scarf made with warmth from one set of wise hands to another. There was no applause, no spotlight, but she felt a purpose bloom inside her again. You see, the heart does not need grandeur to feel alive. It needs expression, creative action, whether through writing, speaking, or crafting helps us make sense of our story. It gives emotion a place to land. It transforms silence into meaning. As noted in many studies, including work published by the American Journal of Public Health, engaging in creative activity significantly improves cognitive health, reduces depression, and increases overall well-being in older adults. It is not just about keeping busy. It is about keeping the spirit open. Helen was not chasing perfection. She was not trying to be impressive. She was simply choosing to show up on paper, in voice, and through her hands. And what she found was not just herself, but a sense of peace, a feeling of being whole again. Her thoughts had somewhere to go. Her emotions had space to breathe, and her days carried color and meaning. not from the outside world, but from within. Sometimes, the most powerful healing begins with a pen, a story, or a single loop of yarn. Helen's days had not grown shorter, they had deepened, because she chose to express, she chose to create. And in doing so, she remembered something essential. Her voice still mattered, her hands still gave warmth, and her life was still unfolding, beautifully, one stitch, one word, one breath at a time. Number 6. Rediscovering. Purpose and a spiritual anchor. The library had always been a place of comfort for Helen. It reminded her of her younger days, quiet corners, the scent of old pages, the joy of getting lost in stories. One day, while passing by the community board near the checkout desk, she saw a flyer pinned between two outdated announcements. It read, "Volunteers needed. Read aloud. Program for children. 1 hour a week." Something inside her stirred. It had been a long time since anyone needed her for something beyond a phone call or a family holiday. She paused, folded the flyer carefully, and tucked it into her bag. That night, she could not stop thinking about it. Just 1 hour, just a few kids. Could she still offer something? Would her voice still hold their attention? Would they care what an old woman had to say? The next morning, Helen called the library. Her voice trembled slightly, but her message was clear. She wanted to help. They welcomed her with warmth and simplicity. Just bring a favorite book. They said, the rest will come naturally. And so, on Thursday afternoon, she returned this time not as a visitor, but as someone with a role. She wore her nicest blouse, combed her hair, and brought her old copy of Charlotte's Web, a little frayed, a little yellowed, but still filled with magic. The children sat on colorful beanbags, fidgeting and giggling, waiting for the story to begin. Helen opened the book, adjusted her glasses, and read the first line. Her voice was soft at first, uncertain, but then something happened. As she read, the room changed, eyes widened, hands stilled. Even the adults nearby began to lean in. For the first time in a long while, Helen felt it not just presence, but purpose. She had not realized how much she missed being needed, not in a grand or overwhelming way, just simply, deeply, meaningfully needed. And that is something we often overlook in aging, the hunger for relevance. According to insights shared in Signs, an elderly person may be in their final year. One of the most important but invisible factors in late life vitality is the presence of purpose. When an older adult loses their sense of meaning, it is not just their mood that fades, it is their will to engage with life. They retreat. They withdraw, not because they are giving up, but because they feel they no longer matter. But here is the beautiful truth. Purpose does not need to be complex. It can be 1 hour in a quiet room, reading aloud to 5 squirmy kids who love every word. It can be a gentle presence, a soothing voice, a kind face. Helen did not become famous. She did not change the world. But in that small space, she changed her own experience of it. She looked forward to Thursdays. She picked new books each week. She started recognizing the same little faces coming back to hear her again. "Miss Helen," one girl whispered once. "Can you read that one with the talking dog again?" That moment stayed with her. She had not just read a story. She had created a memory. And in doing so, she had rewritten part of her own. Purpose is not about productivity. It is about presence. It is about knowing that your life, your time, your heart still have a place in this world. Helen began to smile more. She sat up straighter. Even her neighbors noticed a change. You seem lighter, one said. What have you been up to? She just smiled and said, I have been reading. But the truth went deeper than that. She had been remembering who she was. A woman with warmth to give, stories to share, and wisdom that still mattered in every chapter of life. We need something to hold on to, not just to survive, but to feel alive. For some, it is family. For others, faith. For Helen, it was the simple act of being useful again, of seeing her presence reflected in the smiles of children and the soft silence of a listening room. Her spiritual anchor was not found in a sermon or a ritual. It was found in doing something that made her feel seen, something that reminded her that her time, though quiet, was still filled with meaning. Because when someone gives you a reason to show up, day after day, you stop counting the years and start living them again. Helen had found her reason, and perhaps that is all any of us really need. Number 7, emotional conclusion and call to action. Helen's story is not a fairy tale. It does not end with fireworks or applause. It ends, if you can even call it an ending, with something far more powerful. A quiet return to herself. She still wakes up in the same small home. She still eats her breakfast alone most mornings. But the difference now is in how she sees those moments. What used to feel like emptiness now feels like space she has filled with meaning, rhythm, and small acts of connection. She begins her days with gratitude, not grief. She knows the names of her neighbors again. Her body moves more, not because she is chasing youth, but because she has chosen to stay present in her own life. And every Thursday, when she reads to those bright-eyed children at the library, she remembers what it feels like to be needed not in the past, not out of pity, but right now. For who she is, Helen did not erase her loneliness. She learned to live alongside it. She made peace with the silence and then gave herself permission to speak into it. And what came back was not just sound, but spirit, because one of the deepest truths we often forget as we grow older is this: being alone does not mean being left behind. Sometimes it is an invitation to come home to yourself, to return to your thoughts, to reconnect with your values, to rediscover your pace, not the one the world expects from you, but the one your soul knows well. When the noise fades, when the door closes, and when the calendar grows quieter, that is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a softer chapter, one where you get to decide what matters, one where you finally get to ask yourself, not what do others need from me, but what do I need from myself? In the stillness, Helen found her strength, and so can you. It might look different for you. Maybe it is not reading at the library. Maybe it is planting tomatoes. Maybe it is calling an old friend, or writing one memory a day in a notebook. Maybe it is going for a walk at sunrise, or learning to use your phone to see your grandchild's face more often. Whatever it is, the path forward does not need to be big. It only needs to be real, honest, yours. Your days still hold power. Your voice still has value. Your presence still matters more than you may realize. If you have followed Helen's journey and seen even a glimpse of yourself in her steps, let that be your reminder. You are not invisible. You are not done. You are not too late. Not for joy, not for growth, not for love, not for purpose. You still have breath. You still have choice. And you still have time. The people who truly care, maybe they have not called lately, Maybe they do not know what to say, but that does not mean they have stopped caring. Sometimes, all it takes is one message, one smile, one brave moment to reach out again and say, I am still here and I still want to live fully. So let that be your next step. If this story moved you, if it touched something inside your heart, I want to ask you something simple. Take one small action today for yourself. Just one. Write it down. Do it. And if you feel comfortable, share it. Leave a comment below and tell us what is one small thing you're going to do today just for you. It could be taking a walk, calling someone you love, cleaning out one drawer, writing one sentence in a journal, or maybe, just maybe, it is sending this video to someone who needs to hear it, someone you care about, someone who has gone quiet, someone who has forgotten how much they still matter. Because sharing this story could be your way of reaching out not just to them, but to yourself. A way of saying, we are not meant to go through this alone, and we do not have to. So, if you are ready, take that step, not tomorrow, not when you feel stronger, today, as you are, right now, because that is what Helen did. And in doing so, she reminded us all that the most beautiful chapters in life do not always come early. Sometimes, they arrive when we finally have the space, the silence, and the courage to write them. This is your chapter. You get to write it, and we will be here reading every word, cheering every line, walking beside you, one page at a time.